Hi, and welcome to this online public dialogue on Black women and criminal injustice, missing voices in the U.S. incarceration conversation. My name is Anna Misla, and I'm the project manager for the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown University. I'm delighted to be moderating today's conversation with the 5 outstanding women participating in this dialogue. When we began planning this dialogue last fall with Annie Selleck and Shiva Subbaraman at the Women's Center and Mark Howard at the Prisons and Justice Initiative, I knew from the start that I was very invested in this topic. I have a master's degree in social work from the Catholic University of America, and during my time at CUA, I took a class with one of our panelists, Ashley McSwain, and ended up completing my social work field placement at the organization Ashley runs, Community Family Life Services, which serves women returning home from prison. It's because of Ashley and the women I met during my time at CFLS that I became so passionate about the intersection of race, gender, and the criminal justice system. A few weeks ago, John and Kim, my colleagues here at the initiative, suggested that I moderate this conversation today, and I'm very grateful to be here. There's a lot of interest in our public dialogue with nearly 2,000 RSVPs from around the country and the world. Some have already sent us questions, and we invite you to do so as well by sending them to the email you see at the bottom of your screen. Please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag #MissingVoicesGU and by tagging GUCFT Public Life and Georgetown PJI on Twitter. At our initiative, we've held dialogues on racism in our streets and structures and how the Catholic Church must reckon with its own history of and perpetuation of racism. And I would encourage you to visit our website to view recordings of those conversations. But today we're here to talk about a missing piece in a broader conversation on race and justice, the experiences and voices of Black women. When Pope Francis first became Pope, he surprised the world by washing the feet of women and men in a Rome prison on Holy Thursday. In his travels, he consistently visits people in prison. And at a global forum hosted by Time magazine, Pope Francis said, "Our great challenge is to respond to global levels of injustice by promoting a local and even personal sense of responsibility so that no one is excluded from participating in society." In the United States, our criminal injustice system has repressed people of color, the poor, the socially isolated, and women. But Black women are one of, if not the most, neglected, mistreated, and marginalized groups in the criminal justice system. The number of incarcerated women in the US has increased dramatically from 1980, with over 26,000 women in prison, to 2019, with over 222,000 incarcerated. And Black women are imprisoned at nearly twice the rate than that of white women. Black women and their families are also more likely than their white counterparts to deal with the criminal justice system through the incarceration of a family member. Today, we will hear from 4 Black women who bring experience, expertise, passion, and leadership to this discussion at the intersection of race and gender. Sherry Davis is a graduate of Georgetown's Pivot Program and Community Family Life Services Speakers Bureau program. She's the executive program assistant and office manager at Democracy Initiative, a network of organizations working towards a future in which all Americans participate fully and freely in the democratic process. Kimberly Limor is the pastoral associate at the Faith Community of St. Sabina in Chicago, Illinois, the director of the Augustus Tolton Pastoral Ministry Program at Catholic Theological Union, and the associate convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium. Ashley McSwain is the executive director of Community Family Life Services, an organization serving women returning home from prison or jail and homeless and low-income families through case management, release planning, and navigation services. And finally, Sarita Steeb is the co-founder and executive director of Operation Restoration, an organization that creates opportunities for formerly incarcerated women through college courses, a clothing supply closet, case management services, advocacy programs, and more. But first, to open our discussion, I'm happy to introduce Hayley Wurzbicki, a senior at Georgetown who is part of the Women's Center and was transformed by the Prisons and Punishment course she took with both fellow students at Georgetown and inmates of the DC jail. Hayley will offer a brief reflection on the influence of gender and race in politics and criminal justice reform. Hayley, why don't you get us started?
Thank you so much, Anna. It's an honor to be here. I'm so excited for this today. I'm feeling especially grateful for this opportunity because in preparing for this, I was reflecting on my journey at Georgetown and specifically the moment that I think oriented me towards criminal justice issues, which for me was the fall semester of my sophomore year in 2018. So that semester, I took two amazing courses. The first one was a philosophy course called Crime and Punishment with Josh Miller, Professor Josh Miller from PJI. And secondly, I took a Women's and Gender Studies course called Inequality, Gender, in Prisons with Professor C. Nicole Mason. So the Crime and Punishment course in connection with PJI, part of the requirements for the course was we took one section, one class at the jail with the section that was taught at the DC jail. And I know for me, and I think a lot of my classmates, that was my first time in a carceral facility. And then Inequality, Gender in Prisons was specifically focused on the experiences of women and their interactions with the criminal and justice system, but specifically in prisons. So this semester really sparked my interest in questions surrounding mass incarceration and reform of the criminal and justice system. And I would continue to pursue related opportunities in classes, but most notably what Anna mentioned, I took Prisons and Punishment with Mark Howard of PJI exclusively at the DC jail with scholars in the program there. And I've taken several other courses concerned with topics such as mass incarceration, prison reform, policing in America, and so much more. But I have to say that I'm grateful that I began my journey with a context and focus on women and gender, because it's made it so much more apparent to me how so many academic spaces I've been in since then have, in my opinion, seriously lacked a proper focus on the role of gender in interactions with the criminal and justice system, which has just been so shocking to me because I was seeing firsthand the contrast between the experiences of men and women in prisons. Notably, in that fall semester in 2018, I had the opportunity to interview a student in the Pivot program. And as I'm sure we'll hear about more later from one of our panelists, the Pivot program is a one-year reentry program we offer here through the School of Continuing Studies that provides a certificate in business and entrepreneurship for reentering citizens. And so the woman I interviewed spent about a year at the DC jail before joining the Pivot program. And she shared with me a number of horrifying experiences she had there, but one of which is that the women's outdoor area at the jail was not maintained properly as the men's side was. And so in her entire duration of her sentence, about a year, she did not once go outside. And in addition to that, and being able to enter the jail as I have and take classes and other opportunities, I've seen how women can be enrolled in the same programs, same opportunities as men in these facilities, but have drastically different experiences. And one major part of this is there's just rules about the interactions that women and men in these facilities can have, and that really limits the women's participation in the group work that we're able to do with the men. And so despite women being largely outnumbered by men in carceral spaces, you don't have to spend a lot of time in this world to notice the vast difference in their experiences. And I'm not at all saying that I think the experiences of men in these spaces is ideal or something to strive for, because it's certainly not. But although increasing numbers of women in prisons makes it that much easier for their experiences and struggles to be disregarded. Which is why conversations like this are so important and overdue. And I'm confident that we will leave here today feeling the urgency of this issue and feeling motivated to keep these conversations going. So I'm so excited to be here, and I cannot wait to hear from this amazing panel today.
Thank you, Hayley, for giving us that context and focus. And I'm excited too. Now I'm going to go back and ask the entire panel for a brief opening question. And then I'll come back to each of them with more specific questions based on their experience. If time permits, we'll have some discussion among the panelists after that, and then we'll turn to your audience questions. And so now let's get started. Last June, the killing of George Floyd, along with the killings of Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, Daniel Prude, and countless other Black and brown people, sparked a national uprising and a long overdue reckoning for racial justice and police reform in the United States. Dialogue, self-reflection, and new policies addressing systemic racism are occurring in social institutions across the country, and especially in our criminal justice system. Yet the lived experiences of Black women who have been involved in the criminal justice system and women who support their families while other family members are imprisoned have largely been ignored or are missing in these discussions. Sarita, let's start with you. Help us understand the ways the criminal justice system impacts, threatens, and undermines the lives and dignities of Black women in our communities and nation.
Hi, I just want to start off with saying thank you for having me here today. But yeah, just to start off with how Black women are disregarded in the system, I think that historically it mirrors every period in history where Black women and their thoughts and feelings and emotions have been disregarded. You know, Black women are often viewed as people who can endure pain, who may not be superior in intelligence, and also who are traditionally always at the bottom of the totem pole of any system and section. And I think that in the criminal justice system, or criminal legal system, as I like to call it, the trend continues. There is extreme measures that are put in place to dehumanize individuals. We can start with language. For instance, for 10 years that I was incarcerated, I never heard my first name. I was often referred to as inmate or, convict, or just different terms. So when I was released from prison and someone would say Sarita, I wouldn't even respond because I hadn't heard my name in 10 years. So really thinking about how we talk about folks, how we do not continue to reinforce those dehumanizing ideologies and language. And I think that is how it is so easy for mainstream media in these systems to continue to disregard human beings, because we take the humanity away when we're talking about individuals and we're having these conversations. So it's been really, really enlightening to see that the names of these individuals have been in the forefront. But I think that the reason that people are unable to move and acknowledge the strife and the pain of the demographic of Black women is because we have marginalized them to being some type of mythical, non-humanistic figure in the language and treatment that we use.
Thank you for that. I think the dehumanizing language in the history of this is so important. Kim, let's turn to you. Based on your ministry and your work at St. Sabina, how does the criminal justice system undermine the dignity of Black women?
Again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here on this morning to share with you. As a church that has been involved in various segments of the social justice arena here in Chicago, we are just beginning to look at the women part. A lot of times, a lot of the focus have been on the men. The men have been incarcerated. And that was kind of the heart of the pastor, because, the young guys in the street, the violence and everything that's been happening. But then we discovered as one of our programs started to evolve, the Strong Futures program, that women are also at risk, especially those between the ages of 18 and 30. And so we started opening up our programs to women as well. But we see that as they're coming to us, and even when we look at our social service department, if we look at, our COVID has really impacted Black women, because Black women are the breadwinners of their family for the most part, and raising their families. And a lot of times they don't have the kind of jobs that they can work from home. So either they have to go in or, find childcare for the children who are not in school. So it's just been a conglomerate of different things that has brought this really to the forefront. But as African Americans, we have always and have been dealing with pandemics. We've been dealing with the pandemic of violence. We've been dealing with the pandemic of food shortage. We've been dealing with the pandemic of low or bad schools. And so it's a pandemic after pandemic after pandemic. And so as church, we are here to help them and to help them not only to get the standing or get into the footing that they need to be self-sufficient, but also to help them bring mind, spirit, and body.
That's wonderful. And now it's time to deal with this pandemic of Black women in the criminal justice system. Sherry, let's turn to you. How does the criminal justice system undermine the dignity of Black women?
Thank you for having me. I would say the criminal justice system indignifies the Black woman by not really taking her needs into account. I think the typical African-American woman is viewed as angry, the angry Black woman with baby mama drama. So no one thinks to really listen to what her needs are. And when you're incarcerated, you're in a place that typically does not listen, and you have specific needs that are not met in terms of sanitation or sanitary products not being distributed or given, and having to walk around like that or rely on the other ladies in the facility. And I would say that in my time I met a lot of women, and most of them were very positive. I didn't meet any angry Black women. I met a few with some drama, but not particularly. It was very positive women trying to help and uplift each other. Like, we have to stick together here. You need this, I'll give it to you. So I think that's one of the, I think that's what's most powerful, being heard.
Absolutely. Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that. Ashley, close us out here. How does the criminal justice system impact Black women and threaten their human dignity?
So one of the things I'll say is that the war on drugs treated Black women as if they were just collateral consequences. And we were well into this war and this crisis before we even noticed that women were being affected at alarming rates. And if you look at the war on drugs and the increase in women who go into prison, they all coincide. So, the crack epidemic, the war on drugs, women's increase in the prison system, all happened at the same time. And we never really took a moment to acknowledge what Black women were experiencing. So here we are 30 years later, trying to undo something that has been going on all these years. And so our failure to acknowledge the needs of Black women during the war on drugs, during the crack epidemic, leaves us feeling like less than human, or the system treats women like they're less than human and undermines their dignity. And so, now is the time in which is perfect, this conversation is to really highlight and elevate the experiences of Black women.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully this conversation will point us into ways that we can try to undo the past 30 years, like you were saying. So now I'm going to turn to each of you and have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation. And Ashley, we're going to come right back to you. So first of all, I came to know you in two ways. First, as a faculty member at the social work school at the Catholic University of America. I took several of your classes at Catholic, and you shared your expertise and experience as the executive director of Community Family Life Services, where you serve women returning home from prison, as well as homeless and low-income families. And the second way I came to know you was working with you, Ashley, at the Speakers Bureau program at CFLS, which is a program where women learn how to communicate their lived experiences in a compelling way for lawmakers, nonprofits, and criminal justice and community stakeholders. And actually, Sherry Davis is trained as a Speakers Bureau member. You're a social worker, you're a domestic violence counselor, and you've also served as a probation officer in Philadelphia. So kind of expanding on what you just shared, how did we get to where we are now regarding the criminal justice system's treatment of Black women and women of color? Go into that a little more in depth.
Wow, I mean, that's such a loaded question. And there are just a tsunami of intersections that has got us to where we are today. And so just back to my original point, which is around the war on drugs, was really the time when so many of our Black sisters were incarcerated and then ignored. And so we also have this idea of, sentencing disparities. We have this, this ongoing negative narrative of Black women, who are, under over-sexualized and underestimated and underrated. And so, for years of being in that place leaves us where we are today. There's also Black women are sort of confronted with this idea of the superwoman, like this idea of having to hold it down, being quiet when they're in pain. And, it doesn't serve anyone. It's just some part of our culture. And so we've got, these sentence disparities. We've got private prisons. We've got this narrative about Black women, and all these things culminating together has put us in this position that we're in, which is, acting surprised because Black women are marginalized within this system. And we've been watching it unfold for a long time, but didn't have any tools, didn't have a platform, didn't have a forum in which to make this experience real. I'll say that the goal of the Speakers Bureau was to humanize Black women, was to make their story real, was to create some emotional response. Because without it, people think that's just something on the side that's going on. And Black women have been the primary caregivers for so many of their families. And acknowledging that we're primary caregivers and that we don't always have the supports and tools that we need in order to do this well. This conversation allows us to really dissect and unpack that.
That's exactly right. So let me ask you this. Why do you think the voices and experiences of women are often ignored in these criminal justice conversations? Is it the way that the system is set up and how it was initially structured? Why are women often missing in the criminal justice conversations?
Well, it's a few things. It's historical. I mean, women just are marginalized in general. Number two, women just didn't represent a large number in the criminal justice system. I was at a prison once and they needed a drug treatment program for women, but there weren't enough of the women in the facility to warrant that kind of money. And so that's the experience that, women have had, is that, their numbers are low and they don't warrant the kind of attention that men do. But one of the things that fails to acknowledge is that, when you arrest a woman, you almost arresting her whole family. So while women might only represent 7 to 10% of the prison population, you got her 3 kids, her grandmom, and her aunt, and uncle. Everybody's incarcerated when a woman goes to prison. So the impact is huge, and we never seem to talk about that. Excuse me.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful context as we start this conversation. Now, let me turn to Sherry. Sherry, I think it's important to highlight that first and foremost, you're a Hoya, a graduate of Georgetown through the Pivot program led by our colleague, Mark Howard. You also have 2 master's degrees. You're a former DCPS elementary school teacher. And like I mentioned, you were part of the first cohort of the Community Family Life Services Speakers Bureau. You were also a fellow at the organization Common Cause, where you wrote articles on gerrymandering, voting rights, and as well as rights of the formerly incarcerated. And you currently work at the Democracy Initiative. You have also spent time in prison, and you told me just a few weeks ago you were put on supervised release. Start us off and tell us, what is one myth about Black women that you think pervades our country's criminal justice system? And what do you want people to know about that myth and about your lived experience?
Well, I'd like to say first that I think I defy the myth. One of the biggest myths, as I said earlier, is that the angry Black woman with baby mama drama. I'm not angry. I am Black, and I do have kids, but I have no drama. And I think to kind of reiterate something Sarita said earlier about African American women being viewed as uneducated, that's another myth. Like, I'm highly educated. I don't think you can get more educated than having 2 masters. But I still come up, even with that level of education, I still come up against people who are surprised that I'm well-spoken, or I can write a well-published piece or well-polished piece, or that I can even engage in conversations on topics that are urgent or emergent. So I think that's one of the biggest myths. And I think in order to, I guess, demystify that, you have to hear what's being said and try to put yourself in their shoes. You know, during the time that I was incarcerated, I witnessed and was subjected to very dehumanizing conditions that no one thinks about. Like, I have several people I've spoken to who have been incarcerated, and I've never heard them speak about those things. I mean, I never would have imagined that after a visit, a 2-hour visit with my family, that I would be subjected to a full body cavity search. And when I say full body, I do mean full body. And one of the times in particular was a time when I was on my cycle, and they took out the sanitary product. In my mind, it's like the purpose of that, they say, was to check for contraband. That was so humanizing. I cannot even begin to put it into words to make you really understand what that feels like. And you really need to be able to connect with your family. Like, your whole family does that time with you, but they're just not there with you physically. That's
horrible. And I'm sorry to hear that happened to you, but thank you for sharing who you are and your experiences, because that, I think, is exactly why we're here today. One more question for you, Sherry. When a lot of people on this call are part of faith communities, they're Catholics, they're from other Christian and other faith communities, why is it important for all communities, but in particular these faith communities, to say that Black Lives Matter when discussing women in incarceration?
Well, I think it's important because, as Ashley said, the war on drugs saw a lot of our women, sisters, incarcerated. And they are the forgotten voices, you know, and I think Black Lives Matter and Black women are just as much a part of that movement as Black men. We are incarcerated just as much. In 40 years' time, I think, as of 2019, the Sentencing Project projected that there were over 220,000 African-American women in prison, up from like 23,000. That's a huge jump. That's a 700% jump. And I think that matters, that's a significant jump, and that needs to be accounted for or acknowledged. And those voices need to be heard. If we intend to change these dehumanizing conditions or this over incarceration, or, you know, we just have to, they are a part of the demographic and they need to be represented.
These voices do need to be heard. And let's hear from another voice on this call. Sarita, first of all, I'm sorry I mispronounced your last name, Stibe. We're so grateful to have you on this call here. And you have your own past experience as an incarcerated woman. And that led you to co-found and now run Operation Restoration in New Orleans, which is a nonprofit that creates opportunities for formerly incarcerated women. You have, I think, over 15 programs. You also were recently pardoned by President Trump on his last day in office, which relieves you from a number of other things, but most importantly, It relieves you from paying off a nearly $2 million restitution. You're also a leader and an advocate for state and federal criminal justice reform policy that supports women. If you're comfortable, tell us and everyone listening about your own experience as an incarcerated Black woman, or tell us a story about one of the women you've served at Operation Restoration that shows the failures of the status quo regarding women in prisons.
Yeah, well, that's a lot too. As Ashley said, that's a loaded question. I just really wanted to start by adding to something that both Sherry and Ashley alluded to. Even though the percentage of women who have been incarcerated traditionally are low, there are studies that show that the incarceration rate of women has risen over 800% over the last 40 years. And if we don't believe that women are inherently worse 40 years ago from today than 40 years ago, we have to also acknowledge that now we are criminalizing things around women that have not normally been criminalized, whether that's drug addiction, whether that's survival crimes, as far as, shoplifting or trying to feed your family. Traditionally, those things are not things that men are sent to prison for, whereas women are. So I just definitely wanted to acknowledge that particular point. And then also talk about how I have met so many women who are out on the front lines fighting for their loved one who is incarcerated, but never thought to fight for themselves or talk about their own incarceration or their own involvement with the criminal legal system. As Sherry said before, she thought that the Black Voices Matter movement needed to be heard. And, but it also speaks volumes to me that a woman is the head of this movement, and George Floyd ended up being the face of the movement, and public outcry added Breonna Taylor to the conversation. So really thinking about how us as women often don't fight for ourselves. We fight for our loved one because we're naturally caretakers, or the man in our life. And we never talk about, as Ashley mentioned earlier, our own issues that we may have. And then the last thing is that when Ashley said people think that she's uneducated, I always talk about how people think because you're incarcerated, you're somehow uneducated, like you were stupid for doing this, or you're dumb, or, whatever. And I like to remind people that, I didn't come from the normal socioeconomic background that, you associate with people going to prison. When I was sentenced, my mom was a judge and my dad was a supervisor in an oil refinery. I had a full scholarship to Xavier University in physics and engineering. I was in the military, and I still found myself in jail because what leads women along the path of prison is trauma. By a very early age, I had been sexually assaulted and physically abused throughout the trajectory of my life. So for me, it's about talking about and really acknowledging how no matter where you come from, we can all end up in the same place. But as Black women, what we tend to do, and we often do, is, as Ashley alluded to earlier, we try to take care of everybody else, So my 10 years that I was incarcerated, I witnessed extreme conditions of dehumanization. The first place that I was sent was to Carswell, which was a federal medical facility for women. And the ambulance stayed parked outside of the gate because people were dying every day. So at 19, 20 years old, what I constituted with prison is this is some place you die, because every day someone was being wheeled out in a black bag on a gurney. So I began the trip to be shipped all around this country because I was very angry at 19, not even realizing that is what I was seeing, and felt this need to get out of that particular place. The programs that we've instituted inside of the organization really focus on and combating a lot of those issues. When Sherry talked about the full body cavity search, what we found when we were offering educational courses inside of the prison is that, women often did not have enough sanitary items or enough toilet paper, and they would have to come to class with soiled uniforms while men were walking in the hall with extra uniforms tied around their head, and it really, men could have ice as often as they wanted in the local jail where women couldn't. And it was just those striking, disparities, and looking at most of the correctional officers in this setting are Black women as well. So talking about how can you look at another Black woman and not want to take care and uplift and help her. So one of the things that we passed legislative wise in the state of Louisiana, we created a Louisiana Women's Incarceration Task Force where they had currently incarcerated women, formerly incarcerated women, a judge, a DA, members of corrections, the prison. But the beautiful thing about the task force was it was all women, because we feel like women needed to be talking about women's issues. And we really created this report around what we saw with the disparities and some things that could be supported through that. And then we also passed the dignity legislation here in Louisiana where they could no longer charge women for sanitary items, and they could get as much toilet paper as they want, and some over-the-counter medications were included. So toothpaste, and it's sad that you have to pass a piece of legislation to restore dignity back to human beings, because we forget that we're incarcerating women, human beings, people that are going to return back to society, and that you want them to be able to return in a manner that they're not even more broken and damaged. And that's not what we're currently doing.
But it's so wonderful to hear that you're filling in those gaps and you're recognizing those needs and you're restoring that dignity to this missed population. Tell me a little bit more about the women who are not necessarily incarcerated themselves, but are supporting family members who are imprisoned. Who are these women and why are their stories less known?
I think that everybody is fighting for a space to be heard, right? I think that in the conversation, we can talk about how Black men are incarcerated, how brown men are incarcerated, what's the experience of fathers who are incarcerated. But when we talk about women, we're like, okay, all women who are in the legal system or have been affected by the legal system. So there's no space for individuality or individual stories or individual focus. You lump everybody into a group and say, hey, all Black women, we need to talk about all your issues together. And I think that that's why there's not a separate, conversation around the impact of a man being incarcerated on, the woman that is there to support him. But the thing that I have to give to you too in that conversation is, being in both sides. Going to a visitation room to visit a male in a male facility, the visitation room is packed. There's multiple women, they're bringing the kids, and all of these things. And these men have support through their incarceration by women who, the burden falls on either their mother or their wife or the girlfriend or whomever that may be. But I can tell you, when I was doing visitation for 10 years while I was incarcerated, I can actually name the women who went to visitation as often as I did. Because there's no support, or there's women don't want to place the burden on their mothers or their grandmothers to have to physically, bear the burden of bringing children in to visitation. So I think that the support systems are totally different as it relates to men and women, and not saying that the women who are supporting a loved one through their incarceration, because my mom was that, for me, it's totally different, and women don't have access to the same support services and even after release that men do upon release.
That's very helpful context. And I think that leads in well to going over to you, Kim. So you, for over 20 years, have been working at St. Sabina in Chicago, which is a world-renowned faith community known for its social justice activism. You're also the director of the Augustus Tolton Pastoral Ministry Program at the Catholic Theological Union and the associate convener of the Catholic Theological Symposium. You're a preacher, you're a professor, and you're also a retreat and workshop facilitator. So bring this home to us with the principles of Catholic social thought. What does Catholic social teaching have to offer in understanding and supporting Black women involved in the criminal justice system? And what does Catholic social teaching say about upholding the dignity of women, families, the imprisoned, the oppressed, and the marginalized?
I'm just blown away by these stories and the things that I've been hearing, and like I say, the dehumanization that happens to incarcerated women and Black women in general. Sometimes we stereotype women that are, maybe on welfare or get SNAP or whatever, and or go to prison. And so when we look at the Catholic social teachings, which I always say are the best kept secret of the Catholic Church, is that even the first principle about life and dignity of the human person, that, life is sacred. And if we haven't learned anything about life over this last year with COVID, is that life is sacred and fragile. And so that we don't have time to not be respectful of people. When we look in the book of Genesis, it talks about the Imago Dei, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And so that by God creating us, we have value and worth, but we don't respect the value and worth of each person. And so it becomes very discouraging when you see dehumanization happen to anyone, but especially women who bear children, who have birth all these. You can't have life without a woman, and so to dehumanize women in that way is not Christian. It's not even morally right. And so, when we look at the Catholic social teaching, really all of the principles touch on, the right and life of dignity of a person. It touches on, the family and how the family unit is important, that we should, be able to fully participate and in society. We should be able to have work. We should be able to thrive. And so we're not, mostly African Americans and Black women, we are not really thriving. And so as we look at that principle, it is, that's what we try to do here, is to just help people to really thrive, not only survive, but thrive as they are, going through life. So there's so many, like I say, so many different principles. We have a responsibility as Christians to help others, to be there for them, to give them the helping hand, but not necessarily always, as we say, a hand out, but a hand up. So that, we are not only giving them what they need at a given time, but also being able to help them to become self-sufficient in doing whatever it is they need to be able to thrive. So that's what we work. We look at our Catholic social services. Mostly it's the women that come in for the food for the family, or if they need clothes for the kids, or even clothes for themselves to go on interviews. We have an employment resource center that tries to help, that helps women to become, like I say, to gain that self-sufficiency that's needed. So, kind of like I say, those Catholic social teachings are all really entwined in everything that needs to be looked at, or just to go back to that human dignity piece. Everything is kind of woven into that first Catholic social teaching principle: human dignity of life and human dignity of each and every person, and that we treat each person with dignity and respect.
Thank you for that context. That's exactly, I think, what we need to be reminded of. And we also need to remember that there are so many good Catholic agencies out there who are serving these women and who are helping them get by. Now we're going to turn to some questions that are coming in from the audience. I can't believe the time has gone by so quickly. So please continue to send any questions you may have using the email you see at the bottom of your screen. But let's turn to this one question. This is from a student here at Georgetown, a senior, who asks, how can we rethink and restructure punishment in the United States in a way that prioritizes rehabilitation and centers around Black women and the most marginalized? And I think this ties into what some of you were saying earlier about addressing the trauma and the mental health that comes with these women. Sarita, do you want to start?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question, but I want to challenge the student to think, why is punishment even necessary, right? If we know the root cause of a lot of these issues are trauma. It's not like my trauma had a conversation with myself and said, hey, how are you going to show up today? It doesn't decide in that moment how we're going to show up. I think this culture, this environment, we have a fascination with punitive punishment. But if you go to other countries and you look at how they incarcerate folks like Germany or like Norway, just different countries of how they handle incarceration, it's totally, different than how we do it here. I think that if we look at community-based sentencing, there are really great organizations, as Ms. Kimberly said earlier, about Catholic social Catholic charities is what we call it here. We work really closely with Catholic charities here. And thinking about what community-based alternatives do we have to incarceration? We do believe that people have to be accountable for their actions, but is accountability the only way to say someone is accountable for their action is through a punitive punishment of incarceration? And I know that that's really hard to think about, but if no one sin is greater than the other, and we talk about forgiveness, how do you frame that? Only certain people are worthy of forgiveness, and it's really challenging for me because the things that I have been, subject to, the abuse that I've been subject to, you would think that I would be like, yes, they have to be punished. But the thing I've learned in this work is that hurt people. And a lot of times it's done because that was something that was done to them. And if that's not the case, then we're looking at a mental health issue, not necessarily a behavioral issue. So also not continuing to criminalize mental health as well. So I think when you think about it, there's nothing that currently exists in a way that we could just say, this is what works and we should be doing this. But what we do know is what is going on now is not working. So we need students like you to come up with imaginative ways to say, hey, this is how I feel that we can build a system of accountability, not a system of punishment.
Ashley, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, so in addition to alternative punishments, if we're going to have prison systems and jail, that there needs to be some acknowledgement of gender and how that impacts a woman's stay inside of a facility. And so acknowledging, how that impacts her relationship with her children, acknowledging how that impacts the trauma that she's experienced around confinement and around oppression, acknowledging, those collateral impacts that happen when a woman is sent to prison. And it feels like the system that we're operating from forgets that, women are having a different experience than men. And the systems that are designed to hold them accountable don't take any of those things into account. And if we did, she would come out of a system less broken and less bruised. But instead, we send her into these facilities. We don't acknowledge anything. And then we wonder why when she comes out, she goes right back to prison. And so there needs to be a prison system if we have to have one, Sarita. And I get you that we need some alternatives to incarceration. But if you're going to incarcerate women, you have to acknowledge that her gender needs to be managed, addressed, and it needs to be acknowledged in a way that her jailing is executed.
Thank you both for that. Sherry or Kim, do you have anything you want to add?
I think both Ashley and Sarita said it best, but I would like to say that when it comes to women being incarcerated, one thing about that ties into the myths about their African-American male counterparts. They are viewed as being aggressive when in all actuality, they are just more united inside of the prison. So when they make their demands are heard. So, and I'm thinking one thing about, and speaking about myself, my punishment, as Sarita was talking about, punishment, why look at it like punishment? Look at it as, why aren't there alternatives to incarceration? There are no alternatives to incarceration being offered to women, particularly women who have a history of mental health, or maybe the primary caregiver in their family to a person who has mental health. So one thing that should be acknowledged or looked into. The U.S. over-incarcerates. We are the country with the highest incarceration rate. And that needs to change. So that's one thing that I would like to add.
That's wonderful. And going into that, Kim, I wonder if you could comment on, in the Catholic Church, we have this wonderful model of restorative justice, and many faith communities use this as an alternative. Could you talk a little bit about if you've been involved in any ministry of restorative justice and how that might add to this conversation as either an alternative or an additional piece of the criminal justice system in the U.S.?
Like I mentioned earlier, we had a strong futures program, and we have a strong futures program. And what we try to do is like take that at-risk group. And so sometimes it has something to do with, folks that have been in the prison system or just have, maybe scrapes with the law, but just at risk. And so try to, get them jobs, get them to be more self-sufficient. But that sometimes involves a little more hand-holding with trying to, move them into the direction where, you need to go to work. This is how you go for an interview. This is how you dress for an interview, and all those things that help one get a job. But when everyone was talking, and we were talking about alternatives to prison, the community has to come together, I think, to help. One of the things I think, we tell them, once you get out of prison, you've paid your debt to society. However, we're not going to give you a job because you have a record. So all of those things that kind of continue to add to a person's trauma of either, being in prison. Now I can't get a job to support my children and to become self-sufficient, or to live in a decent apartment takes place. So they have those circles that they created that some people do get in to be able to just talk through and share their experiences and be in a safe space that helps with the healing of some of the trauma that is experienced. So people have used those. We haven't really used that here. But we have been involved with, like you say, just trying to help them, even if it takes a little more hand holding. But I don't think the people really come, the women come to really know, like I say, sometimes, like I say, if they have kids, what am I going to do with my kids if I have to come over here to a program? So I think it's going to take a little more effort for us to have to really reach out and do that.
Absolutely. And I know the organizations that Ashley and Sarita run, they offer services like that, childcare, clothing closets to help women prepare for job interviews. They provide these wraparound services that are so, so needed. We're running out of time and we're getting so many wonderful questions. I'm sorry we're not going to get to all of them. But here's one that came through that I think is really very interesting. Someone wrote, I think this is directed to you, Sarita. They're interested in the Barred Prison Initiative and the program that brings higher education to people in prison and reentry programs. And I know you worked on some legislation related to higher education and women in prison. Can any of you speak to what needs to be done to grow existing programs like this, and how we can get these programs into every prison and available to everyone in prison that wants to partake in the program?
Yeah, we currently run a college and prison program at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in partnership with Tulane University and the School of Professional Advancement. For us, it was very important that the professors and the way that the program was framed lied inside of the nonprofit organization and not necessarily inside of the educational structure. We interview, professors. We make sure that they're using humanizing language, that they are very much involved in providing a student experience. And it is all led by formerly incarcerated folks and some folks who took classes while they were incarcerated, which I did myself. I think that we have to acknowledge that these structures of education, educational systems are also rooted in, white supremacy, and hospitals, colleges, and prisons were all built to provide a service to white men. They were not ever built to be inclusive of gender or race. So there's no way to fix these things because they weren't created for anybody other than white men. And that's just, what it is. And for me to say, oh, let's fix something, you can't fix something that wasn't inclusive from the beginning. So when you talk about how we educate people that are incarcerated, you have to start thinking about the things that make it an inclusive experience for students, not inmates, not convicts, but students. And how do you provide the same educational experience inside of prison as well as outside of prison? The other thing is that, you can't allow predatory institutions into these spaces. And when you think about predatory, you think about institutions that aren't providing really great educational opportunities, but we also consider predatory to be, you can go inside of prison and provide a college program, but when these people are released, they can't apply to your university. So the legislation that we put in place was to remove the questions around criminal history off of college applications, making Louisiana the first state to do that. And we've done it in 5 states since.
That's great, Ben, the bucks. Ashley, do you have something you want to add?
To say very quickly, one of the things that we need to do is to acknowledge that these kinds of supports are not rewards for bad criminal behavior. I mean, we run into that quite frequently. This idea that if you provide some revenue to educate someone who's incarcerated, that you're somehow rewarding them for their bad choices. And it's just, that narrative needs to change. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are necessary for someone to come out and begin anew. And so they're rehabilitative and not punitive. And anything that rehabilitates people seems to be seen as a negative thing. So if you're investing money in education inside the jails, the question is, well, people that never committed a crime don't have those kinds of access. Well, there's a lot of collateral experiences that people in prison had that a lot of people haven't. And so if we can stop thinking about, punishment and look towards the criminal justice system as more rehabilitative, then we won't have this narrative and have these barriers to allocating resources that would provide this level of education to people that are incarcerated.
I think that's exactly right. And it would also go on to address these underlying issues of trauma, drug use, domestic violence, all this that is part of this very complex topic. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time. So I do want to wrap up here with a closing comment. And Sherry, I think we'll start with you. And if you could just each keep this to 30 seconds or so. One of my favorite Catholics is Servant of God, Sister Thea Bowman. And in an interview that she did on 60 Minutes in 1987, Sister Thea said, "Sometimes people think that they have to do big things in order to make change. But if each one would light a candle, we would have tremendous light." So my question to each of you is, what is one candle each of us listening can light, or one action we can each do to recognize and support our Black sisters? Sherry?
That's a great question. I would have to say, in terms of that, is try to walk a mile in their shoes and not pass judgment.
Perfect. Ashley, how about you?
I think people should recognize that sisters aren't looking to be absolved of their choices. They recognize that they are going to be accountable. They're just seeking some fairness in the way that justice is delivered. And, as the title of this, it's just not just what's happening to our sisters and brothers. And I want anybody listening to acknowledge that we're not advocating an abdication of responsibility. We're advocating for fairness and some acknowledgement of the experience that Black women are facing every single day.
Kim, how about you?
I would say just use that we see you. And be able to look them in the eye, hear their stories. And if you can help, great. But if you can't, at least you've looked them in the eye and gave them the dignity that they need, that you are treating them as a full human person.
Beautiful. And finally, Sarita, what is one light?
So mine is grace. I think that we should all give each other grace in our decision makings, how we show up and what goes on and what happens. We carry a heavy load as Black women in America. And I think that a little bit of grace goes a long way.
Grace is what we need. What a perfect way to end this. Thank you so much, Hayley, Sherry, Kim, Ashley, and Sarita, and thank you all watching for joining us. Just a quick reminder that this discussion will be recorded and posted on our website and social media channels for later viewing, and we'll also have follow-up resources for the discussion posted there as well. I just want to preview an upcoming attraction. Later this month in February, we're going to be holding a major public dialogue like this one in our series on Facing the Faithful in U.S. Politics on poverty and dignity priorities in the election and beyond. Finally, thanks to all who helped on the technical end of this dialogue, and a special thanks to my colleagues John Carr and Kim Daniels, and our students Harriman and Sammy, who helped make this dialogue go so smoothly. Finally, please join me in thanking our panel, Hayley Wurzbicki, Sherry Davis, Kim Lymore, Ashley McSwain, and Sarita Steib for their outstanding contributions to this conversation. Thank you for joining us.